part of the role of the masculine, I believe, is to be in deep devotion to the feminine. There's a beautiful gift that the masculine can offer the feminine and vice versa. And I think it's only when we are able to take that time to slow down and really come back to our truth that we can really see that.
Welcome back to the LaCroix Show. I'm glad you're here with me today. My guest is a venture capitalist and a founding partner at Magic Ventures, as well as a longtime entrepreneur who's founded multiple companies in the crypto, education, and sharing economy spaces. A fact I find especially inspiring, given that Simar Mangat isn't even out of his second decade yet, because he started as an entrepreneur when he was in high school. So welcome to the LaCroix Show, Simar.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We have already had some really beautiful conversations, one not so long ago, shortly after we met. And I was so inspired by your vision for the world and your commitment to your own personal growth and to changing the world, in short, and changing the world in ways where you want to bring other people in to do it in community and in collaboration, which is a value of mine. So I feel really connected and like we have a lot of kinship.
I feel the same. I mean, I feel like we've both been on like these, these journeys across time and towards the same mission. And I feel like one of the things that we both really bonded on was just the importance of love, and sort of coming back to that. And as something which we both hold really dear, like how do we reach for epic love? How do we reach for just more love, a collective experience of greater love in the world? And so it's so beautiful to be like both on the, like, how do we create, and just feeling the immense amount of creative energy that we both have, but then also feeling aligned on the mission in terms of what we're really about here.
Couldn't have said it better. In service of more love for the world, for more people in more ways.
Yeah.
As I told you before, this is a revamp of my audio podcast. And on that show, I love to ask people to share something from their childhood, something from their family of origin that they think might have impacted or influenced who they are today, how they're showing up in the world today. So I'm wondering if you have something to share on that.
Yeah. So I grew up, both my parents came from Punjab in India. So I'm like, I was born here in the United States in California. But for them, part of their religious background is Sikhism, and it's a beautiful, beautiful religion in so many ways. And one of the core values that religion at least hold that my parents really adopted was the value of service. And so there's the temple is called the Gurdwara. And when I was very, very young, it was really beautiful. Like there were two things that I feel like really come to mind. One of which is like my dad would wake me up at 3 a.m. sometimes, and we'd go to the temple and we would just pray. And it was like there was chanting, getting into a mantra, getting into sort of like a deep state of connection with with the divine in that moment. And I grew up speaking Punjabi, but part of the scriptures in a little bit of an older Punjabi that I couldn't quite understand always. So for me, I feel like my connection to love and to the world really came through service. And in the temple, there's a soup kitchen. So I would love going and washing dishes, serving food, cleaning the floors, like whatever it was. I think there was an element of, when you are in this state of devotion, to whatever it is, it could be the simplest things, but there's just a profound sort of surrender and melting away that comes from that, of just the profoundness of being able to put a smile on someone's face who's going to be receiving a clean dish on the other side, or going and asking if somebody needs any more food or more water. Like these are really, really simple things. And I think over time, I feel like my life has sort of expanded from that place in terms of what I can create, the more, the gifts that I have to be able to be of service. But I feel like there was some of those early memories of just being in the kitchen, washing dishes, like you have chai, you have you have food, the smells coming in, but just that sort of state of devotion. I feel like, going way, way back into my childhood, starting with my parents and how they devoted themselves to raising me, bringing that forward into the places I got to be in. So yeah, for me, I feel like that's part of really where it comes from.
In the letter that you wrote describing your vision for the world and some of the service that you're bringing is that Siva is a way of seeing each moment as an opportunity to serve with love. And the other part that I loved that you wrote is that it's also honoring the truth that we are all interconnected at the deepest level.
Yeah, it's like we all are deeply interconnected. Some whatever part of ourselves out there that we haven't yet even found love for is some part of ourself that we have yet to find, just yet to reclaim within ourselves. And so I feel like there's this beautiful journey we all get to be on of like reconnecting with ourselves by reconnecting with the world and vice versa. And I think that process of loving what is out there, loving out what's in here is really what it comes down to, like really, I feel like what we're here for and part of the journey that we're all on.
The fact that you were so steeped in your family's traditional culture, probably I can hear how that really made such a big difference and makes you pretty unique and might explain why you said that you even had this vision of love, even from the time you were a child and when you were a teenager also, even though it showed up in different ways.
Yeah, I feel like there's been a way in which like some of these core principles have just really evolved, but they've also come to face with other recognitions of life as well, like losing loved ones, like the grief of some of the things that have been are even happening in our world today, and sort of like being able to face that and reconcile of like, wait, okay, like this is how I hold the world, and maybe not everybody sees it that way, or maybe there's other things going on, and sort of to face that, I think as well. It's I think it's been a really beautiful journey of realizing more and more like how much, and I think for at least for some of the work in some of the communities that we've both been a part of, like how much of the work also comes back to what's the work here happening, like what's that work happening with self, with like moving through trauma, moving through grief, moving through emotions, and coming back to that place of authentic essence. Because I feel like sometimes it can feel hard. It can sometimes I feel like there's all these forces that can try to put the light out, right? But I think we have to very intentionally continue to feed the flame and surround ourselves with people who really bring that out in us as well.
Yeah, well, you just said a lot. There's a lot of different threads I could pick up on that, as has been the case with our conversations generally. But I think the piece that I want to pull on is because you mentioned the impact of grief and loss and challenge, that it's a really interesting human dance, I think, how we hold and recognize and even I guess I'd say welcome in the impact that the challenges that we face as human beings have on us, because they are all initiations. And
Mhm.
and it is a lot for us as human beings to hold all the disparate parts sometimes that are in conflict, especially as our world gets so much more divisive, and we have to not only face our own grief and our own pain at seeing the circumstances around us, but then also navigate how we might perceive it differently than other people do. And so, we can have this vision for unity and companionship and collaboration and community, and then there are these other also human forces pushing against that all the time, and doing that dance with challenge and grief and pain while also holding a vision for what's possible, I think is a real art.
So, I mean, it so is, and it can feel really tough at times too. We held kindness assemblies in my high school, like helping organize, like anti-bullying. Like there was such an element of like, how do we really spread and ripple positivity? And then it was like there was a dear friend and classmate of ours who committed suicide and took her own life, and it was really hard to grapple with coming out of that. Like I volunteered at an orphanage in China that following summer. And over the course of the time, like literally in the first week, there were some kids that were like, in hospice condition. Like we knew that they were chronically ill, but we ended up, one of them ended up passing away while we were there, and we did a funeral for that child. And it was like, and to be caring for these children, which were right on the precipice of passing, and they were just kids. And it really was this big grappling of like, wait, why, like in a world in which we're all connected, like why would how is this fair? Like these kids barely get to experience life and they're gone, and it was just, there was like some really deep grappling with all of that. And I think some of the things which I didn't even realize until later, like some of the guilt around my friend's passing, of not being more there, of like not being like not even knowing that that was happening behind the scenes. And so it can be really tough sometimes to be in acceptance of and like in recognition of like how life moves, you know, like both the beauty and the creativity and the life that is a part of nature, but then also these, you know, the other just parallel sides of the cycle, the death, the loss, the elements that like, you know, that we grieve and we lose. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's like that dance, you know, and I'm curious for you how you've really navigated this as well. Like, what has that dance been like for you, Lisa? Like that navigation.
I don't know if you remember this, but when we were speaking one time, I said, wow, it's really amazing that you have the perspective you do have at such a young age, because it's my own personal experience that there's two ways you come to seeing things on a bigger scale. It's two ways you come to that deeper understanding of our interconnectedness, of the
Yeah.
sense that like love is really all there really is for us to focus on when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
And one of those ways is by aging. And when you age, there comes a certain point where you ultimately experience loss. And I would say that in my life, I've been so fortunate in my life, I haven't really experienced a lot of loss until I was quite a bit older. And so it absolutely was an initiation for me, losing my mother and then a divorce that I went through after 20 years of marriage. And those things really knocked me over and you took the breath out of me and became an
Yeah.
opportunity for me to see things in a different way and to dig deeper in terms of what I wanted, who I am, what I need, um, what I believe in, what I care about, what I want to bring my presence to. And so I would say for me also, it has been those initiations of loss, of confrontation, of what really matters, that have taken
Yeah.
me deeper.
Yeah.
So
Ah, wow.
and there's a whole thread we could go down around loss and death, but I guess what I'd say about that, the main thing I'd say is that one thing I've come to realize is that there really is no way of separating. And I think you just referenced this. There really is no way of separating the most brilliant and alive experience of being a human and coming to terms in whatever way we do it with loss and grief. Like they just are interwoven dances, and like you can't have one without the other. You know, like it seems like a platitude, but it goes pretty deep. We are in a common community in the John Wineland community because you did EMLT with John
Right.
and I'm in John's teacher training program. And so we met through our mutual friend Speed and other people who are working collaboratively within that world for some of these
Yeah.
things that are the larger purpose of connection and epic love and depth
Yeah.
and presence. But the interesting thing that I'm noticing just as we're speaking is that I came to the teacher training program and I signed up for the teacher training program after my divorce. And when I realized how much healing there was for me to do with the masculine, and it's been
Mm.
powerful for me in that way.
Coming into EMLT was twofold. Like one of which was, I think when I, you know, so when I was in college and I have a younger sister, I've got many just dear female friends. I wasn't like, I think coming out of Me Too and coming out of some of these like really significant and really important movements, right? To bring voice and light to things that have been happening in the shadows, like just to honor that. Um, I think I from my place, I wasn't quite sure how to be in my own masculine. I think there was an element of like, I really want to support and empower the feminine, but I wasn't quite sure how to do that. And I think for me, there was like an unconscious Xing out of certain parts of me that came through in the years following everything that was going on. And I think I was, you know, still able to maintain a sense of self, but there was definitely an element of like, you know, wanting, you know, feeling unsafe in my own body in this way and looking and seeking for something different. And so and this is like huge credit to my partner at the time, because she really brought me into some of the work. Like we did a polarity workshop together in Santa Monica, which was really profound on with John Weiland. And I think that just brought me into like, oh, the power of, I had never been in a group of other men or brothers in that way before. And I was like, oh my goodness, like this is really powerful. This is really healing. And it's so amazing what we can do and what we can uncover there. And so that was actually part of the premise of coming into EMLT, was like just realizing in my own journey how this was so more of this was the work. This was the work of like stepping back into a more embodied masculine, being able to understand and feel into what that looks like, how it could feel. Max, who's a mutual friend of both of ours, like I think was a really big, beautiful influence in that. Jason Sparks and Bennett held like a beautiful weekend retreat, nourishment in nature, that was like also just, I was like, okay, like this, I see what this is about. This feels like a next edge of growth. And so that was part of what was coming into EMLT, was actually, this is how I want to show up in partnership with my partner. And that's what that led to. So Panamint.
Panamint is one of the iconic retreats that happens in John's men's program, EMLT. And of course, I've never been to it, but the way men speak about it, it's pretty epic.
To be in a state of like total connection with nature in the desert, and to come out of there, I think both feeling the sort of support of brothers, but then also sort of clarity too. And like I think, I feel like one of the questions that John loves to ask, that I feel like I still come back to, is like, what is the truth of your hearts? Like, what
Your
is the truth
heart.
of her? Yeah, what is the truth of
Yeah.
her heart? What is the truth of your heart? And
Yeah.
being able to really live from a place of deep integrity, recognizing like all that takes, right? Feeling your feelings all the way through, the shadow work, some of the taboo work, like all of the work that we're doing is, I feel like, all in service of really being able to step into like a more fully embodied expression of life, of consciousness, of all these things. So I still look back, both from that partnership, like I'm so grateful to my partner for how she showed up, and just like all of the work that was a part of that relationship. And I'm also just, yeah, just grateful to be on the journey and for everything that sort of moved through since.
Yeah, the one thread I want to pick up that I think is really so important, and it really is deep in my heart, is your recognition of the impact of the Me Too movement on you and on other men. Because I think post Me Too has been, obviously it was something that needed to happen deeply. It needed to be revealed. All that stuff needed to come to the surface, and we needed to, as women, both recognize the times when we have been impacted that we had maybe not really even considered to be an impact, and for
Yeah.
men to look at the ways in which they, may have,
Yeah,
done harm.
totally.
But beyond that, I have so much compassion for all the ways that it has made men vulnerable,
Mhm.
and I'm not being very
Yeah.
articulate about it, because it's really deep. I have
Yeah.
just, so I feel the pain of men post Me Too.
Yeah.
And I am also so honoring of those men in our community, you and the other men that we've already spoken about, and all the men and just the men in the world who are saying, hey, I'm willing to look at how I show up, and I want to take on
Yeah.
a different way of being in the world. And I think John articulates it so beautifully and from the core, as
Yeah.
the new possibility for the masculine is to show up in support of the feminine, the divine feminine in himself, in his partners, and in the world. I think it's a
Yeah.
beautiful way.
I feel like in my own experience, the reconciliation piece of this is so critical,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's an element of like, we're steeped, I mean, growing up, right? Just like you're steeped in a certain like masculine nature, like, how the masculine shows up has certain characteristics, like in media, in television, in what we see in movies. And so when I was coming out of college, like one of my friends was like, and I love her dearly, like she was a really, she had been really impacted, in a negative way. And I think that was confronting, both from the perspective like, oh my God, like how have I shown up in this way that can be potentially hurtful to the people that I love? And that was really difficult to grapple with, and it took some like, this is before I even knew that there was a reconciliation process, but like I reached out to women in my life, to people that I felt like I had potentially wronged, unintentionally or intentionally. And that was really important to me. And I remember I remember going on a long walk with my friend. I was like, hey, or, Amanda, I was like, Amanda, hey, here's what's been coming up for me. I'm thinking about writing these messages. Like, here's what I want to take, here's what I want to like claim for myself. Like, I'm really sorry. And I don't know how to navigate this. And that, it was she was so graceful and so compassionate and like, hey, like, just like first off just honoring the process, but then like, hey, like here's how you can reconcile in some of these places. But he was, I think there's like two sides of this, right? Because there's like both, one of which is the pain of confronting how we have been as a masculine showing up for the feminine, which has in many ways, I think, been unconsciously very hurtful and very, objectifying, demeaning, often misogynistic. There's been elements of the masculine that have been really harmful.
I feel really actually quite emotional with you sharing
Yeah.
this. And my experience after that period of time, and I'd forgotten it until you said this, before I also knew about a reconciliation process, the number of men that reached out to me that I've had relationships with in various forms saying, if I did harm, I'm sorry, after that period of time was so moving to me. I felt so grateful for that happening. And so just to give some love and some appreciation to the power of reconciliation, even if it is just saying, can I check in and say, in the case, all the cases to the men I was so grateful for them reaching out. They were really concerned that they had maybe had a
Yeah.
negative impact in ways that I did not feel that in any way. And so I got to reassure them. But what a beautiful opportunity to examine that and to recognize, as you just did, that there has been damage done, sometimes unconsciously. The power of reconciling and taking responsibility for the impact that you have on a relationship in negative ways, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, and then apologizing for, and then thanking the person, is just such a powerful, I think it's even been more powerful than I really was expecting it to be.
There's a moment of that moment of recognition of like, man, maybe I did something to hurt you,
Mm-hmm.
but I love you. And
Yeah.
and there's like an element there that is like deeply healing. And there's a forgiveness aspect to it as well. Like I think there's an element of that compassion and forgiveness of like, look, I may have erred and I'm really sorry. And like here's
Yeah.
what I want to take responsibility for. But yeah, it's such a beautiful I feel like you hit the nail on the head too. Like it's such a beautiful gift in the work and the communities that we're a part of.
Yeah.
That is such a that is it's a very integral element of it is like this reconciliation between the feminine and the masculine. Um,
Yes.
because I think there's a lot of men that have good intentions that want to be better that often don't know how or don't know
Yeah.
what the steps are to be able to step into that. And I think that's why this work is, at least particularly from the men's side, like so important because it is like I think we're going through and navigating a time when part of the role of the masculine, I believe, is to be in deep devotion to the feminine. Like there's a beautiful gift that the masculine can offer the feminine and vice versa. And I think it's only when we are able to take that time to slow down and really come back to our truth that we can really see that and allow that to unfold and allow for creation to move from that place.
So beautifully said. We're always going to make mistakes. We're always going to be in error. And so the repair process is something, the reconciliation is really something that is so necessary for us to practice and to share.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Maniverse, because
Yeah.
that's so related, and maybe you can draw the
Yeah.
connection between
Yeah.
all the beautiful things you just shared and your vision for Maniverse and how it came about.
There's like a beautiful sort of tie back into this is just that love. We talk about love and we talk about reaching for love, and how we click. And in part of at least my understanding of love now is that it's not just a feeling felt, but it's a practice, and it takes not, it takes repair and it takes recommitment. It takes committing to and continuing to move from that place. And COVID happened. My grandfather passed away, and I spent some time back at home, spending time with my dad, spending time with my family. And then I felt this deep call to be actually close to the ocean. And so I moved down to, LA, Redondo Beach with some of my best friends. And that was beautiful. And so on 11/11 in 2020, there was like as I was like meditating every day by the beach, there was actually just like a vision and a call that sort of came, just like this sort of vision to create something that is a transmission of love. Like that felt really, really clear. And so there's been an element of like finding different ways of affecting change. I feel like for a long time, a lot of my interest has been like, how do we change the systems at play? to be able to cultivate, greater compassion, reduce consumption, like, sustainability in some of these pieces. I would say coming out of EMLT this year, some of the work that we did there, having some time for myself, coming out of a relationship, being in San Francisco, I think I just sort of felt this deep recognition and realization that, I both personal, so on the personal level, I'd been working on this intellectual level of our systems for most of my life. Like, I sort of approach like, how do we cultivate more love by like, how do we create more technology? How do we create better systems? Like, how do we do the thing that's going to create more space for love? And I think I just sort of, I don't know, I think I just sort of had this deep realization of recognizing in my own journey just how important it is to both care for the self, right, the inner work, but also release the emotional energy holding existing, beliefs for self. But then also, if we want to shift our systems and how we exist as a society, part of what we need to create is like the infrastructure to support that transition and release. Like, how do you actually allow for and create spaces that are healing, that allow for energy that's stuck, that's existing and rooted in maybe old ways of thinking to just dissipate. And so I think there was some recognition and realizing of like just how powerful, in being held by other men in moments of grief, in moments of anger, like how powerful and how healing it was to move through some of these emotions and experiences. And then also just, some of the power of like breath and embodiment and being able to allow for that movement to happen. And so I think as these things were sort of like coming together, and in collaboration with some of the other men and some of the people that are in our world, I think it just became clear to me that, it's actually really, really important that we create these almost like these safe spaces for people to drop into themselves, to be able to heal, to be able to step into their own bodies, to be able to come into and activate their own breath. And so that was some of the seedlings, some of the seed nutrients and soil that led to the existence of Mana and how it's been evolving and growing since then. But yeah, that's how, it really came from this place of like, okay, if we want to create a deeper, you see so many people moving technology in the world forward, at least particularly in the Valley, right? There's like all this push to how do we go forward? How do we make things better? How do we things make more efficient? As I've been stepping off of that wheel in and of myself, I'm like, actually for me, what calls is like, how do we bring humanity into a deeper experience of itself? Like, how do we go deeper, not just forward? That's the intention. That's the sort of like, I feel like that's the aim of like, how do we really create these deep spaces of healing for people to come back home to themselves, to experience themselves in a greater way, and to have the tools, the emotional support they need to really thrive in their lives.
I mean, the beautiful thing that I see in you is that you are willing to, and in a position to, and maybe at a time frame in your life where you could bring some of your unique skills and gifts in technology and in
Yeah.
entrepreneurship to this community that is so focused and so committed to depth and love. And I think that's such a beautiful combination. So, and a rare one. And sometimes I think that that's, I'm always interested in the idea of superpowers. What's our special gift? And usually that lays in the place where we have multiple interests or gifts that overlap in a unique way.
Yeah.
And it seems like your experience in entrepreneurship and technology and in software programming, computer science, all that stuff, interwoven with your commitment to love and connection and community is just such a beautiful gift.
Thank you. Yeah, it is, and in some ways, I feel like just to even draw a parallel from our earlier part of the conversation, I think maybe at a more systemic level, like there is a healing that I think there's a healing that's happening from the larger yang and yin, the larger feminine and masculine, right? Because I think it's so easy, as we've seen, for like in growth and in progress, for technology just to be existing for the sake of technology, right? And like there's the things we can do, but of course unconsciously it can hurt, it can hurt others. So I think part of at least what I'm also seeing both in my world and like how we're moving is like, yeah, technology for the sake of technology is not an end. It can only take us so far. It's actually in the healing and in the reconciliation that technology can become service of a larger mission. And I think that's maybe sort of like, I feel like a parallel in the personal journey, but like in the sort of larger sense as well. I think that's what's happening. And I think that's what's needed.
Just love how you drop that meta piece right on top of it, like parallel. parallel the masculine and the feminine, the yin and yang, the technology, the
Yeah.
love. Really beautiful. And that's exactly it's exactly what feels true and right to me, and really so beautiful about it. Now, for people who don't know what Manaverse is, and hopefully they will soon, we'll put the links to all the offerings in the show notes. But talk a little bit about what Manaverse
Yeah.
is for people who don't know.
Right now we're hosting weekly spaces, embodiment and breathwork offerings to be able to, Lisa, you had a great one that just dropped yesterday. That was amazing. But everything from being able to step into a greater experience of self. So through embodiment practices, also there's breathworks that are moving through, for example, grief, slowing down, being able to move through and celebrate and rediscover joy. So and we're of course experimenting, we're playing right now in a state of discovery. But right now, what we've sort of done is taken almost these primary colors of emotions and experiences and brought them down into practices and spaces where you can really drop in and dive in, whether it be moving through grief, whether it be reclaiming joy, whether it be slowing down, whether it be stepping into the feminine eros, or unleashing, sort of like finding your own creativity and unstucking yourself through a wildland practice that speed is leading. And so it's evolving, but right now we've got these live offerings, and in parallel, what we're building is a mobile app as well that we're going to have on-demand practices and a content library to be able to really serve you where you are on your path. And I think, so there's pieces that are coming together, but right now in its current form, as we're recording this episode, we've got a whole host of live offerings for people to drop into, to step into a deeper connection with themselves, to be in community with other people, and to just to be in a space of like deep love and care with some incredible facilitators. Like I think one of the things that's been beautiful is like not just the offering, but the transmission that each facilitator and each person that's been hosting an offering is bringing to that specific space. And so there's a wealth of knowledge and experience here that I feel like has been, we've all been on our own journeys doing so much inner work. And I feel like there's an element too of some bringing some of this to light, and I think we're so needed right now.
Really appreciate that aspect of it. It absolutely speaks to my values when we collaborate and create community. And I
Yeah.
think your vision for that and your commitment to that is so felt by me. I mean, I feel like ever since we've met, you've been such a yes to collaboration and to communication together, and to working things, to creating it, to co-creating.
Yeah.
Such a value for me. And so it's feeling so wonderful. And yes, we're going to put the information in the show notes. There's some incredible facilitators. Most of them, I know, and I've worked with
We've
myself.
talked about already.
Yeah, we talked about Max Tremblay and Speed Weed and
Yeah,
Chris Bielecki.
that's
And I
right.
don't know Chris personally yet, but I plan to go to one of his workshops. And of course, on Tuesdays from 9 to 10:30 PST, I'm leading Feminine Unveiling with different topics. Next week is going to be the subtle erotic, and I have other things planned. So if you're a woman, please find the show notes, the link to the calendar, and come join me there on Manaverse on Tuesdays from 9 to 10:30. I have a model that I call Artful Aging. And one of the principles of Artful Aging is bidirectional learning. That means that older people learn from younger people, and younger people learn from older people. And we have a lot of cross-generational pollination. It's one
Yeah.
of the things that I love the most about my life, about my community, is I get to learn from and be influenced by people of all different generations. And so I would love to know if there are a few things you would share from this point in your already rich life at the age of what are you, 20?
28. Yeah.
28, some life lessons you might have to share with my audience, who are,
Ooh.
wide ranging, but largely
Yeah.
leaning towards the women's side and leaning towards the older side. But yeah, what are some of the things that you have learned that we might glean from?
I would love to ask you the same question and
Yeah,
hear yours as well.
sure.
I feel like I heard this, people say this, but it's really come true. I feel like in a profound way, which is like the power of and the truth in enjoying the journey. I think I have like just been one that I'm still in the practice of, but I feel like has really, as I've like gone in my own journey, just realized more and more. It's, I think for a long time I was so fixed on the where we need to get to, like the destination, only to then get to the destination and pick a next spot to sort of move to. And so I think I've just sort of realized like both the preciousness of life, its fleetingness, and then really how there is just the journey, to enjoy to be in collaboration and community around, and like just how important that is. So I feel like that's one, it's like one that I feel like is like moved from like, you little K know it to like more and more like the bigger K know it, like you really know it and you start to feel it. Um, I mean, honestly, I think the second thing is really like it comes back to what we have, I think, honestly said, which is just like love being the way. And I think there's like a way in which the way knows the way too. Like I think when you really stop and you listen and you feel into it, like I feel like for me, the practice has really been like, how can I choose love in this moment? Like, how can I choose love for myself? How can I choose love for the people around me? Like, how do you choose? How do you really choose love in any given moment? Um, so I feel like, I don't know, those two things. And then I don't know, the last thing I'll just bring in, because I feel like there's just some like, is that it's just never, it's never too late to like, to go for it. It's never too late to go for and create the thing that calls to your heart. And that might change too over time, but like, sometimes even I feel where I'm like, man, am I just get like, am I, am I like, am I falling behind? Like, am I getting, and I think there's these like stories that sort of can build up, but I don't know. I feel like I was, Lisa, I was reading, I had my 10-year high school reunion, and we had written letters to ourselves to be read 10 years from then. And so I totally forgot that I had written a letter to myself. And he's like, you might be old in age, but you can always be young at heart.
He being you back
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Me. In his mind, he was like, oh, Simmer's going to be way, way older then. And so he like made a note in his like, you might be old in age, but you can
28-year-old old in age.
20-year-old. I know.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, that premise goes so deep, and it doesn't really matter what age people are. A lot of times they're feeling that pressure of time passing, and like they've missed the mark and they've missed the boat and it's too late. So I love that you as a 28-year-old are bringing in the reminder that it's never too late and you're never too old, which is definitely one of my messages for the world. So I love that, because we can be reminded of that regardless of the time frame that we're in.
Yeah. And I think the way that we stay young at heart is actually in some ways like all the things we've been talking about. It's, it's that dedication to self. It's in your feelings all the way through. It's really stepping into it's like all these things I think are practices that you realize like do keep you feeling alive and feeling young, and willing to take risks. Okay. That's on my side. I'm curious to hear your side, Lisa.
Okay. I haven't thought about it in advance because I was doing my best to listen to you and not pre-think it. So let me see. There's always many, and probably they will come from our conversation because that's what's top of mind for me. Because we already did talk about it, I would say that part of our human journey is getting good with death. And that means getting good with death as we get closer to it. It means getting good with death as we are living it day to day. We live in a culture that does not support us in that endeavor. We live in a culture that is so afraid of touching on death. And so it's a journey that we have to take ourselves on to get good with it. And what I'd say personally, recently, I realized that it's something that I feel really committed to in my life at this point in time, which is I want to be so good with death when I die that it is a celebration and easeful for my children. Like that's the test for me of how good I am at with it. And I think that it also impacts how we live. I've done a lot of thinking about death over the course of time. And interestingly, and maybe ironically, or maybe not so ironically, I was married to someone for 20 years who's trying to cure deaths, who's trying to cure aging and working on longevity. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a beautiful endeavor to try to have us live more healthful lives for a longer period of time. But sometimes it can obscure the fact that our journey as human beings is to be okay with that part of our life as well. In Silicon Valley, it's a little bit of a contentious thing for me to say because there's so much of a move for anti-aging and longevity and curing aging and all that kind of stuff. Like it's kind of in the zeitgeist. So I feel like a little bit of a rebel saying we have to get good with death.
Totally.
But I think it's really essentially important for our human journey, and it changes the way we live our life. So that's one. Another one has come to me as a result of processing what it means to have an ADHD-like brain. I didn't realize until I was in my 50s that I have a total ADHD-like brain. And that means that all of the common messages in our culture that say one-pointed focus, 10,000 hours on one thing, you can't multitask, it doesn't work. All the cultural messages, they just don't work for me.
Yeah.
And so where that's led me in terms of generalizable messages is we need to know who we are, how we learn, how we process information in a way that is our individual imprint, and become okay with it and utilize it in all the ways that are beautiful about that way. So for me, particularly, that means letting go of the messages of you have to niche down, letting go of the messages that say you have to only focus on one thing, letting go of all the judgments and the personal, ways that I might reprimand myself for not doing things the way that are seen as being the right way in the common world, and instead saying, what do I know about myself? How does my brain work? How do I live my life? And to continuously keep coming back to living life on my own terms, creating in the way that makes the most sense and takes most advantage of the uniqueness of my way in the world, of my way of thinking, of my personality, of my interests. And so the generalizable part is that it's really an important practice for us to keep on coming back to ourselves, to increasingly understand with more depth and nuance who we are, and then to bring that self into the world and to create from and to love from and to be in the world from that place. Yeah. So those are two things that come to my mind right in this particular moment.
Death and learning and like really being able to like come back home to self.
You started us there. Come back home to self. So I think that's a beautiful circle. The practice of coming back home to self and to loving from that place. That's where we will create connection and epic love.
I'm so with you. That's such a perfect tie back. Yeah.
We've shared and we will share the connections with Maniverses or anything else people need to know.
This has been such a gift to be on this episode with you. And yeah, I feel like there's just like an element of, for whoever's listening, as we're all going on this journey, continue to grow this community as well. I feel like there's like such a power to bringing light to some of these conversations. These are important. So if anything sparks, like reach out, come through.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here with me. It was just a beautiful conversation. And for everyone else, thank you for being here. Thank you for following along. If you are interested in hearing more conversations with the other amazing people I'm going to be having on the show, please make sure you subscribe and hit the notification button so you're aware of all the times that we go live and that we publish new episodes. You can watch more videos. There's a playlist here and another video that you might find interesting here. Thank you for being here.